before I get into customer feedback, I want to just tell you a little bit about my previous life, which was running a training business in London. So we were an SAP specialist training provider. In fact, we were the only authorized training partner for SAP in London, which was a really privileged position to have. And as a consequence of that, we didn't really have to try that hard to win business. We had a huge amount of referral business. It was high value. Business was booming. This was pre the financial crisis. And, happy days. We would collect feedback on paper, and we got great feedback from people. We would basically look at the paper sheets and sort of massage our egos and agree we really were very good at this, and then basically put the sheets away in the drawer, never to be seen again. So we really didn't make much use of them, but we didn't really need to. But as you know, in business, nothing stays the same. And so it wasn't long before we had competitors enter the marketplace. And these companies were not authorized partners, but actually that gave them a number of advantages. And they could just basically do what they wanted, whereas we were very constrained. So they were able to undercut us on price. They didn't have to pay hefty royalties to SAP. And also, they were much more aggressive about their marketing than we were. So these things hurt us in a number of ways. And although the business never got back to quite where it was, the lesson that I learned from that, and really this is what was behind Coursecheck, was the idea of trying to create a tool that would allow training companies to collect feedback and use it to make genuine improvements to the business. And at the same time, if you're a commercial training provider interested in selling your courses, then to also provide a way of getting the feedback out there into the public domain. And so that was what Coursecheck is all about. But I'm not here to talk about the product specifically today. What I want to talk about is, as you know, with any software program, it's all about how you use it. And so we've worked with a lot of training providers doing all sorts of types of training. And what I want to share with you today is some of the sort of best practice that we've acquired and developed working with lots of providers in how to make the most of their feedback. So part one of this talk is going to be looking at feedback from a management perspective. So this is the quality control side of it. So we're going to go through these sort of topic headings here, particularly focusing on survey form design, because obviously the information that what we can do with it is very much dependent on what goes in at the top of the funnel. So that's the survey form itself. And also going to particularly look at the quality of responses we get. Joe touched on this. So it's no good just having a response. We want good quality responses if we're going to make a difference. So what is the role of instructors in that? Because I believe they can play a huge part in that. And also some general sort of tips and tricks to how to maximize that response rate. We'll end up on this section talking about negative feedback, because that's something we all have to deal with. Nobody's perfect. And finally, follow-up feedback, because as we all know, ultimately training is about making a difference. So you might have had a great experience on the day, but actually did it help me do my job better or differently, and how do we actually look at that? So reporting and analysis, there's a reason why I put that at the beginning of this section, and that's because we should really always start with the end in mind. It's very tempting to sort of design the survey form and then think, right, let's produce some metrics from it. But really you want to think of it the other way around. So what are the key performance indicators that we want to actually report on and collect? And that's what will end up shaping what we put on the survey form. It's pretty simple. It's, establish what you want to measure, set a target for it. That's something that's often missed. So rather than just report, our average NPS, Net Promoter Score, average rating was this, what does success look like? And, it can be a bit arbitrary, but just agree a target amongst yourselves. You can always change it, but by having a target, you've got something to report against. And share it within the company. And there's a lot of evidence to say that the more you talk about something you're doing, performance management, getting it out there, that in itself helps to lift performance. So it's really worth it's sort of having a real push sort of from the top of the company as to why this stuff matters. It's tempting, if you don't do it right, people to think, this is going to be about a stick to beat people up with. No, this is about, we're all trying to do better, and people need to, obviously understand it's a constructive thing. Make it matter. I mean, one of our customers actually goes as far as bonusing every single person in the company on the Net Promoter Score that they get out of Coursecheck each month. And guess what? Everybody really cares what that Net Promoter Score is, and they all want to know it. So, I'm not saying you should go that far, but it's an example of, the sort of thing you can do to really get people behind it. So let's go on to survey form design. And it's very easy to think about, that example on the right about, how did you rate us? Excellent, excellent, excellent. And I suppose the analogy is if you go into a hospital or you go to see a doctor for a checkup and they tell you your blood pressure's fine, your pulse is fine, but what if it's not? It doesn't actually tell you what's the matter. So, these kind of scores are fine as a sort of health check, but they won't actually help you improve the business. And that's what we really want to get at with survey form design. So it's all about improvement. That should be the thing that underpins your thinking about what questions you put on the form. So it's good to have some score-based questions because that's, if you like, the measure of yes, it's working. But actually, if you want to make a difference, you do need to have a good number of text questions as well, because those are the ones where you'll actually get people contributing ideas. It's very easy to think, and I put myself in this bracket, that there's nothing our customers could tell us that we don't already know. And the fact is there is, and there always is. There's always those little nuggets. And the thing about quality is it's not about making big strides forward. It's often about those small steps that you can take. When somebody suggests something, you think, actually, that's a good idea, we should think about that. But you don't get that without those sort of more open questions. So don't have mandatory questions if you're doing it digitally. It's a sort of, the culture is, you've got to tell us. Well, no, we haven't. We want that, you're giving us something, they're doing you a favor. So we don't like mandatory questions. Make them answerable, and by that I mean, it's very tempting to ask questions like, okay, you've done the course, how much time do you think you're going to now save back at work? And it would be great, of course, to know that, but people actually don't, so they might guess. But you don't, that's the sort of question that you might want to ask down the track when we talk about follow-up feedback. But in terms of the sort of after the course experience, don't ask questions that you can't get an accurate answer to, tempting as it is. Redundant questions, so that's the idea that you've got two questions which are sort of similar, and really you could put them into one. And again, think about why you're asking the question. If you're not going to do something with it, then in a way, it's just information for information's sake. So coming back to the KPIs, everything should be driving into that or about making improvements. Who wants to know? Think about your audiences. So your trainers will certainly want to know. So you've got to think about what information is going to be helpful to them. And you, as the training provider management, you'll want to know. And then also, if you're running private courses, your customers are going to want to know things too. So think about the sort of information that they're going to want to see and make sure you've got that covered on the form as well. But really, less is more. Some of our customers have as few as 5 questions on their survey form. We've got one who remain nameless that has 26. We think that's way too much. We would say 8 to 10 questions is a good number, but it's about getting the mix. For those of you who want to go in more detail, there's a website I can recommend called smilesheets.com, and it's run by a guy called Will Thalheimer in the States. And what you can do there is you can answer a series of questions about your survey forms, and it will give you a sort of spit out a diagnostic, if you like, as to whether your survey forms are sort of fit for purpose. It's worth having a look at. So, digital versus paper. Look, we touched on it already, Joe did in his talk. There's lots of benefits for going digital, and I think they're generally self-evident. The one that's perhaps a little less obvious is the fact that people are more honest and they're more insightful on when they're doing it digitally. The honesty comes, is particularly important if there's anything negative, that with paper people can be a little hesitant, let's say, especially if it concerns the instructor, to put something on paper and then hand it in. But also people are surprised, a lot of our customers who are switching from paper to digital, genuinely surprised by the amount of comments and the depth of comments that they get back that they would never have got on a paper form. We did have one company we talked to who did a trial on Coursecheck, so they went from paper and they used Coursecheck, and the trial seemed to go very well. They got lots of feedback, but I have to say that there was quite a lot of negative comments in there. And there were things that people didn't like. And at the end of the trial, I said, great, so you're going to sign up? And they said, no, we're going back to paper. And I said, why? They said, well, we found we got better scores when we used paper. So I usually have an answer to everything, but I was a bit speechless on that one. But the key thing about paper, and the number one reason people tell us they use it, of course, is response rates. And it's interesting because training as an industry is incredibly fortunate to get the amount of feedback that they do. If you think of any other industry, whether it's a hotel, a restaurant, or something you buy in a shop, most companies would kill for getting even a few % of their customers to tell them what they thought. So training companies are incredibly blessed to have this opportunity to collect huge amounts of feedback. And I sometimes think there's a little bit of a sort of almost too much focus put on the fact that anything less than 100% is some sort of failure. And actually, what we're really trying to do here is to get feedback that is that we can actually use to make decisions on. And it's not really about having to get it from every single person. It's usable information. So response rate is partly about how much you get. And obviously, we want you to get lots of feedback, but it's also the quality of the feedback. And I want to talk about that a little bit now, because coming back to the number of sort of questions you got on the form, we did this analysis across Coursecheck of over 40,000 responses to survey forms. And it was interesting to see companies that asked lots of questions versus companies that asked only a few. And the point of these two charts really is score-based questions. You basically find that the more you ask, the less you get. So people are only asking sort of 5 questions, getting pretty much a 93 response rate, 93%. And then it tails off. But on the text questions, even more dramatically, if you try to ask too many text-based questions, then actually people just don't give it to you. So it's tempting as it is, it's really worth trying to say, let's just use a few. And you can chop and change them. I mean, for example, as well as getting feedback about the course, it's also interesting to get feedback about what else you might do. So for example, let's say you have a basic course in something and you're thinking about doing a more advanced course. You could put on your survey form, would you be interested in a more advanced course? We're thinking of writing one. And collect information about it for a few months and then decide, actually, we should do that. And then guess what you can put on the survey form? You've done the basic course. Would you be interested in the more advanced course? And suddenly you've got something for sales and marketing to get their teeth into to say, right, let's go and sell to those. So you shouldn't think of it as something that's completely set in stone all the time. And if you're thinking about making decisions about something, it's a great opportunity to actually test the market for whatever it is you're thinking about changing. The more you ask, the less you get. So your instructors can play a huge part in this, especially for those of you obviously running classroom courses, because they are your ambassadors. They are the ones who can sell it to the delegates in the room. And there's a big difference between saying at the end of the course, oh, we've finished, oh, by the way, before you go, would you mind just doing the survey form? It's on your desk in front of you. Much better if you make a big thing about it, so the instructors can say it right at the beginning. We're going to be collecting feedback at the end, and come the end, you say, right, we've got 5 minutes left, the course isn't quite finished yet, and this is the last thing is like, just get that feedback in. And even if you're doing it by email afterwards, the point is that the instructor should make a big plug for it. And if they explain, why you want this information, tell everyone to be honest, say you don't just want to have your egos massaged, you really want to know what you could do that a little bit better, they will do it. And we see a big difference in Coursecheck from one company to another in terms of, the quality of feedback we get or they get. And really that's down to, it's not about the survey form or it's about how they actually went about getting the people to do it. So negative feedback is something we all get from time to time. It's normal. And I think, especially for those of you who are training companies as opposed to in-house training teams, there's always this fear that if we put information out on or this stuff out on the web publicly, that this is going to damage the business. And I think in response to that, you just have to think about your personal lives. I mean, if we never went to a restaurant because it had got a bad review, we wouldn't really eat out very much, would we? And it's just normal to get some negative feedback. And in fact, there's evidence to show that if a product you're looking at, it's got all 5-star reviews, people are actually pretty skeptical, and I know I am. And the more they've got, the more skeptical you become. And there's, of course, if they're average 3 stars, you think, well, I believe it, but I'm not going to buy it. And there's a sort of optimum, which is shown to be around about 4.7. So if you can average like a 4.7 with your scores, you're at, that's believable, and people will say, yeah, they look good. You know, and it's that, they want to see that sort of smattering just to show you're normal, that there's a few ones and twos in there. But really it's about establishing, you know, there's certain standard stuff here. So establish approaches to deal with negative feedback. The key thing is deal with it promptly. Don't leave it to sort of sit there. Do pick up the phone. You know, there's nothing like speaking to somebody on the phone and to take the sting out of something. It's tempting, it can be tempting to just fire off an email and deal with it that way. But we would always say, if you can, pick up the phone and have that conversation. And then your follow-up is, you know, as discussed. And if you're using an online review site like Coursecheck or any others, obviously you have the opportunity to respond publicly. And those responses are really, really important, because obviously if it's public, you're not just responding for the benefit of the individual, but actually you're showing everybody else what you're like. And I always say the test of a good company is not whether something never goes wrong, but it's how you handle it when it does, because that's just the way things are. And we've all got examples of that. And if you actually think about it, sometimes if a company handles a complaint really well, you end up thinking, what a great company, and arguably better than if the thing had never gone wrong in the first place. So look, it's not something to really concern you about. Obviously, if you've got a lot of negative feedback, that's a different problem. But just to have a little bit is fine. And don't make it worse. I mean, sometimes feedback can be genuinely unfair. It's like some people you just can't please. And really the watchword there is a sort of art to it, really. But you want to empathize. You don't want to take up a sort of an aggressive stance saying you're wrong. But empathy, you know, so you could be sorry that they're sorry without actually saying we did anything wrong. And there's a certain skill to that. Great opportunity to show off your customer support. So lastly, follow-up feedback. Now, as I said at the beginning, the on-the-day experience can be great, but does it necessarily translate into making a difference back in the workplace? And all the evidence is that there's a lot of other factors that affect that. So for those of you running open courses, it's pretty difficult to really go and check on the follow-up feedback. But for those of you running private courses where you have a more direct relationship with the client, I think it's something that's really interesting to talk to them about, is how are we going to make sure that this investment you're making in training is going to pay off? And by having that conversation early with the customer, you're showing them that you're their trusted advisor. You're not just there to take their business on that day. And there's a lot you can do. You know, again, if you're going to do that, part of the on-the-day experience is the instructors can say, look, getting your feedback now, but we want, you know, we're going to ask you in sort of 6 weeks' time to tell us what difference it made. The importance of reinforcement is the key thing here. So there's I'm going to depress you all now. I don't know if any of you have heard of something called the Ebbinghaus curve. Anyone ever heard of that? No. Otherwise known as the curve of forgetfulness, which is a bit more what it says on the tin. And this is what it looks like. I don't know if you can all see it there. It's pretty depressing because essentially we all forget very, very quickly. And if we don't have an opportunity to sort of think about or reinforce what it is we've learned, then, you know, after one day we've already lost 40%, we've forgotten it. By 2 days it's worse. And within a week you're down to just 20% left. The depressing thing for me about this is, of course, if you don't think about feedback tomorrow, then by Monday, 80% of what I'm telling you today will be gone. And I hope it's not just this bit that you remember, but it's really important to talk to your clients about, you know, how we're going to make sure that investment is worthwhile. So that's all I want to talk about in terms of the quality control side, if you like, or the management side of feedback. So now we'll just touch briefly on the marketing side. So with marketing, as you appreciate, I want to talk about B2B marketing because there's sort of perception that reviews is more of a consumer thing. And we'll just talk about some of the differences. Testimonials versus reviews, and also, you know, how can we use those reviews to help us if we're doing them publicly? How can we use them with Google and also in other ways? So the importance of reviews. Now these stats are actually quite old. And I think, you know, these numbers will probably just be higher than they were then. I mean, there's no doubt that word of mouth and a personal recommendation is the best type of referral you can have, but online reviews is very, very close behind, and that gap is sort of narrowing all the time. And I think people are getting much more savvy about reviews now. They look at them, they start to think where they come from, you know, could they be fake, etc., etc. So they're more savvy, but there's no doubt that they are just here to stay. And if you think about people who've grown up with reviews, I'm old enough to remember before the internet, but people now in positions of authority in companies, they've never known anything different. So they're making all their personal decisions based on this type of decision making. Why should it be any different with training? And of course, some business decisions, there's many factors, but training is one that actually online reviews particularly lends itself to, because it's an experience, it's generally quite well defined, and people can, you know, if they can read about that experience that other people had and say, yes, I want to do that. Really helpful, especially, you know, if you've got a high value course and people are comparing that with perhaps the same sort of course that's being offered by somebody else, but much cheaper, you think, well, is it worth the money? And actually, if you can evidence that, yes, it really is, then people will, you know, there's a sense that you get what you pay for. Testimonials versus reviews. I mean, testimonials were, you know, they're better than nothing. I'm not going to say that, but reviews are really taking over from testimonials. I think the exception is where you've got, you know, people recognize with testimonials that you've chosen them yourselves. So even if they believe them, there's that sense of it's not everything. And these days people want that warts and all, you know, they don't just want to have it filtered by you. In fact, I was talking to one company recently who said, you know, I really like the idea of having all my reviews on Coursecheck, but what I really want is to have all those reviews on my website. And I was saying, well, do you? Because actually, in some ways, by keeping it at arm's length, it's more authentic. As soon as you bring it into your own site, you're basically saying, raising that suspicion that, you know, this has somehow been sort of filtered, or it's sort of almost like damaged goods if you've got it yourself. But by keeping it at arm's length, you get around that. So reviews, I mean, I put brackets around untrusted because obviously there can be, nothing's perfect. There can be some issues around some review sites, but by and large, they are trusted, and people may, you know, love or hate TripAdvisor, but a lot of people use it. It's like 140 million people a month go on it. So, and it's that complete picture that people obviously want to see. The fact that it's independent and it's also very search engine friendly. So let's just come on to talk a little bit about Google. You know, as like the Coca-Cola recipe, Google uses a very secret formula for deciding what goes where on the search results. But we do know a bit. There's over 200 different signals, as Google calls them, that determine where something sits. And we also know that Google really likes user-generated content. It's a very strong thing for Google because Google thinks of it as authentic content. And it's all about, you know, providing information to people. They want to see authentic content. So what Google will do, you know, and you can do this on your own websites as well, but certainly review sites do it as a matter of course, is to build them in such a way that tells Google these are reviews. And that's what causes Google to then put the stars in search results. So you can see an example from Coursecheck. This is natural search results. This is not paid for with Google. This is just natural. And the evidence is that people look at results, and if there's stars against them, there's something like a 30% increased click-through rate. And even better than that, the actual people that do click through are statistically much more likely to be interested in actually buying that product or service. So they're not just sort of idly browsing. There really are people who are interested in, you know, what do people say, because I might want to buy that. Something that's a bit less well known is, and I hope most of you, all of you have a Google business profile. They're free to set up. And if you have one, what's perhaps a little less known is that Google will also, if you have reviews out there on the web, Google will find those and it will incorporate them into your Google business profile. Again, another example here, reviews from the web. It's a section that Google puts in. So lastly, you know, people think of reviews as being all about SEO and Google, but actually there's lots of other ways that you can harness that feedback from a marketing point of view. And a lot of them are obvious, but social media, putting it in your marketing collateral, talking about it in newsletters. We see customers tweeting about their feedback, putting it in other posts, putting it in their email footers. There's lots of ways that you can harness it and get the word out there that your courses really are as good as you say. So that's really the end of what I wanted to talk about today, apart from I'll just finish with one slide on our integration with accessplanit. This is, after all, accessplanit conference. Not going to go into any detail about this other than to say, essentially, we've used the accessplanit API to pull through lots of information, static information, out of accessplanit into Coursecheck. The benefit of that is that then if you wanted to use Coursecheck for collecting reviews, it's a very easy thing to sort of enable. And the idea would be that then delegates, everybody's got one of these, and the idea is Coursecheck's designed to work with this, so in the room you get people to use this to give their feedback at the end of the course, and it's a very seamless process. So to wrap up, you get an awful lot of feedback from your customers. Almost every training company does, and it's free. That's the great thing about it. It's a free asset, and all I'd urge you to take away is just the thought that we're collecting all this feedback. Are we really doing as much with it as we can, both as a quality control tool, finding those little incremental ways to be better, and also as an evidence and how we can actually win new business? Thank you very much for your time.